right, so hello and welcome to Innovation Celebration, the show where we celebrate innovation, advancements in science and technology, and the people and ideas that make them possible, as well as how they impact human flourishing. I'm Angelica Worth.
And I'm Thomas Walker.
And today we have a very special guest, our very first guest on this podcast. We'd like to welcome Dr. Michael Kauffman.
Hi, how are you? Good to be here.
Thank you so much for coming. So could you just start out by telling us a little bit about what it is that you do and who you are?
Sure. I'm trained as an MD PhD out of Johns Hopkins, and I did my internal medicine in Boston at Beth Israel and then Mass General. And I got into the pharmaceutical industry pretty early on. I was practicing. I had an internal medicine practice at MGH, and I got a little bit tired of telling people about the same drugs and the same old side effects and the prognosis, and said, we can do better. And we being the pharmaceutical industry. So I was recruited. It took me 6 months to agree to an interview because people didn't leave academia back in those days to go to the sort of bad side pharma, which turns out to be the great side. And I finally went, and then I was sold in 24 hours. I've been through many companies, some that have not been successful, some that have been very successful. I've been involved with the FDA approvals and European approvals of 3 different drugs for cancer. I'm extremely proud of that. And I am currently a senior clinical advisor board member at Karyopharm, which I co-founded with my wife, who came up with the idea. And I'm the board chairman at another company, and I'm on the board of a third company. So our goal in the pharmaceutical industry is to continue to innovate and continue to make great new drugs, so that if you do get a bad disease or even a not so bad disease, that we have something to offer you, and we can hopefully give you your life back.
That's wonderful. Could you tell us maybe a bit more about some of those, well, the successes and the failures, really, because you have to have the failures to have the successes ultimately, don't you?
Yeah, this industry, you're on the cutting edge of science and medicine. And while we plan and we do all sorts of experiments and spend a lot of time and money testing in test tubes and then animals and then finally in humans, ultimately only about 1 in 20 or even 1 in 40 now new ideas for drugs and devices make it. And that's pretty scary, but that says that we have a lot of great drugs now, and the bar is getting higher and higher, which is great for patients and people and society. And we just have to keep innovating. The first company I was in was Biogen. It's a company that's been in the news a lot around Alzheimer's, but back then it was focused primarily on multiple sclerosis. And I happened to be there at the time that we got the second interferon approved. It was one of the first disease-modifying agents. It was the first drug to really show that patients were not going to progress as quickly as they used to before this drug. And it was a game changer. Had a lot of side effects, a lot of issues. Wasn't real pleasant to take, but it really set the beginning of innovations. And Biogen's come up with many other drugs, Tysabri, Tecfidera, and many others that have really changed things for multiple sclerosis patients and made it, in many cases, a chronic disease that was not so debilitating. Still, we have work to do, but it changed that disease completely. I wasn't directly involved in that, but I was involved in a second project that got stuck in phase 2 clinical trials due to some unexpected side effects in humans, but didn't happen in animals. And that one of the challenges in this business. But I moved on to a company called Millennium, where I did a lot of different jobs. I was involved in molecular diagnostics. And then finally, I was the vice president of clinical. And we brought in a compound, which was called PS341 from the company that had started it. The inventor was Julian Adams. The reason I'm telling you about this is that that company went out of business, and we bought that compound pretty much by mistake because it was sold in a fire sale to another company, which we acquired. So this second company, we bought 10 compounds plus PS341. It turned out all 10 that we thought were going to be amazing, only 1 or 2 of them were amazing, and the other 8 or 9 were not. And the one compound that we thought would do nothing ended up being the first drug that was approved from this company. It was PS341, became a $2.5 billion blockbuster called Velcade, which I had the privilege of being the first guy to lead that and bring it over the goal line. We had a paper in New England Journal of Medicine, and we changed multiple myeloma, which is a form of blood cancer, blood and bone cancer, from a 2-year death sentence to something that could arguably give you maybe 3.5 to 4 years. May not sound like a lot, but when someone has a diagnosis that says you've got 2 years to live, and then a drug comes out and now it's 4 years, that's a big deal. But more importantly, that's what happens. That was, again, the foundation for changing this disease. And I've since been involved in 2 other drugs approved for this disease. The average lifespan now is somewhere between 7 and 10 years. And for the first time ever in the last decade, we've now had patients that are living 20 or more years from this. And this was never before possible for this uniformly fatal cancer. That's what's happening in general in medicine across many, many different types of disease. And that's why I'm so thrilled to be involved in this business.
Yeah, we absolutely love talking about medical developments on this show because we always want to connect the advancements to human flourishing and the medical advancements so easily and naturally. Like it's like you said, you're giving people back their lives, and that's huge.
Yeah, and also you mentioned multiple sclerosis at the start, and a band I follow, their drummer had to leave because he got MS and he couldn't drum anymore. So, somebody whose skill set, lifestyle depends on being able to use their bodies, giving them that back as well. It's more than just people's lives; it's the things they can do with their lives as well.
Mm-hmm.
I agree. I just would say, there was nothing more gratifying when I was a doctor, when I was practicing full time, to be, say, in the emergency room and have someone come in really dying of congestive heart failure and so-called decompensated heart failure, when for whatever reason their heart just decided that it had enough, and rather than have a heart attack, it just stopped pumping, and the patients start to fill up with fluid. Your lungs fill up with fluid, and you can't breathe. And we have back then, back before 2000, we had some decent therapies, but at least we could treat the disease acutely, meaning right away. And I had several patients I can recall to this day where they'd come into the emergency room, and really within half an hour, you had them breathing comfortably, sitting up, talking, whereas, when they came in, they really thought they were going to die. And this really was some of the formative kinds of thinking that I did before I moved to biotech, to say, why can't we do that for other diseases?
Awesome. So we've talked a lot about some of the innovations you've been involved in developing and some of the motivation that you had for doing that, which is really important. But what do you think, besides the motivation, are really key for innovation to happen generally?
Well, one of the proudest things we have at Karyopharm, of course, second to the drug that we have approved now, multiple indications and more to come, is a set of values we call ICURE, which stand for innovation, courage, urgency, resilience, and energy. And you asked a question that really was the basis for coming up with those cultural values that are still in the company. And even as I step down from the CEO-ship as we become a commercial company, and I'm not really into commercial as much as I am into medicine, those values are there. And those are the values of the biotech industry. It's a long road. It is a marathon that has to be run at a sprint pace because the competition is harsh and the diseases, frankly, are harsh. We have a saying that the patient is waiting, and especially cancer patients. When we had a pandemic, the cancer cells did not decide to slow down or stop because we were dealing with a virus. And a lot of people forgot about that. There are devastating diseases that were left behind, including cancer and heart disease, while we dealt with this pandemic. And I'm not blaming anyone per se. I'm just saying that these are tough diseases, and you've got to keep your eye on the ball. The innovation is critical. And the place I graduated medical school in 1992 from, as I mentioned, Hopkins, one of the best medical schools in the world, we have made breakthroughs in medicine that are unbelievable and unfathomable. In 92, when I graduated, when we just named HIV, the AIDS virus, and it didn't really have any decent therapy, and we had some, but not. AZT was just coming. It's a chronic disease now. Hepatitis C was not named yet. It was called non-A, non-B. And heart failure had 1 or 2 therapies. We have about 7 now. The average lifespan of heart failure was 2 years. Now it's over 5 or 6 years, the average. And again, there are tails. So this kind of innovation, resilience, courage, urgency, energy is so essential. And the belief to do something to perturb the universe is what drives us. And frankly, it's just ironic that a lot of Ayn Rand's views and a lot of the views that are espoused on the objective standard and in this philosophy are absolutely essential. The last thing I'll say is, and I remind the employees of this as I advise them, the cancer cells don't care how you feel. They don't care about whether you try. They will win unless we beat them. And it is harsh and brutal, and it is as objective as you get in medicine. There's no room for making stuff up or 1 + 1 = 3. It doesn't work that way. So it's just ironic that I'm in an industry that is brutally honest. And the FDA and the European Medicines Association, they're all very difficult, and they should be, because human health is involved. But when you win and when you make a breakthrough, it changes the world.
So that kind of brings me on to what I've been wanting to ask since you started talking about the approvals process and also about the urgency aspect. Like, people can't wait 3, 4, 5 years for the FDA to approve something if they've got a condition that's going to kill them in a year. So how much do you think the FDA in particular and the regulators in other countries are holding up this innovation? Because in the UK, we have a lot of people who fly to Switzerland and places where there's lacks a regulatory environment to get access to new treatments that they can't get access to in these countries.
Yeah, if I can, I'll again be brutally honest. We just came back from a week-long trip from Italy, meeting about 10 we were at 10 different hospitals, a bunch of executives from Karyopharm, including myself as a board member and medical advisor. The access to drugs in general in Europe is far below what it is in the United States. Both the rapidity of access in Europe as well as the extent of the drugs that are available in Europe. UK, unfortunately, largely because of NICE and the general UK health system, actually has far fewer than most European countries. And people, if they want the best therapy, they've got to leave. I would hate to see the United States go to that position. The problems in Europe with EMA and speed are exemplified by our drug. Unfortunately, we have 1 approval in Europe. We have 3 approvals in the United States under the FDA. It took an extra 1.5 years in Europe. And I don't believe that it's a fair statement that it's because they're more careful, especially with diseases like cancer, which are uniformly fatal. This is not the place that you need to be careful. You need to be objective, and you need to weigh the benefits and risk. And you also have to put yourself, when death is your other alternative, the risks and benefits have to be different, have to be thought of a little bit differently than is typical. All of that said, I think even if we completely corrected the regulatory system, and I'll give a plug to the FDA in a minute, but if we completely, almost if we said we eliminated, let's say when we got clinical trial results, a statistician looked at them, an external independent data safety board reviewed them, and within a month we had approval. Let's take that case. The biggest problem right now is recruiting patients into clinical trials and cleaning up the data. The medical system is so far behind the best technologies, the sort of Bitcoin level technologies. Even online banking is way ahead of medical data sharing these days. And part of that's privacy and concerns, which are, in my opinion, overblown. But there's a lot of people who like to disagree with that. The side effect is that it takes longer to get innovative medicines to patients. And I think that's not a risk that we ought to be taking. The recruitment to patients to clinical trials is extremely difficult, laborious, and really linear, whereas a lot of our world has sort of escalated in an exponential fashion with the advent of technologies. And people are slowly trying to bring in the kind of smartphone technologies and more modern ways of doing things. But the biggest problem right now is clinical trials and data handling, cleaning up data, making sure it's correct. The last thing I'll say is that the FDA system around the pandemic was extraordinary. It was unheard of. And I can tell you, we did a trial in COVID with our cancer drug because frankly, almost every biotech reached out and looked to see if there was a reason, a rationale for using their drug against COVID because it's so devastating. And the FDA review process and turnaround was extraordinary, as was the EMA review process turnaround. And then what was done on the other side on the vaccines, which was as transparent as it possibly could be and scientifically based, was really beautiful. It is a shame that the emergency use authorization kinds of mechanisms and the speed with which that was done can't be implemented, or let's just say without the appropriate leadership isn't implemented in other diseases, because it does show what's possible with a robust scientific objective review in tens of thousands of patients, far more than most drugs are studied, and really a stupendous job by all around. So we know what's possible by sort of taking out the bureaucracy in the system, if you will, and it's something for the whole pharmaceutical field to aspire.
Well, while we're briefly mentioning the COVID vaccines as well, I think it's a testament to private innovation, the variety of different vaccines we have in the US and Europe versus the one from China that doesn't really work very well. So yeah, that shows how competition and having a couple of different teams, or a number of different teams working side independently, has produced just a slew of useful products.
Yeah, not only the vaccines, but also medicines, which substantially, up to 90%, reduce the risk of death and severe debilitation from this virus. It is astonishing. And the United States deserves a huge plug here. And you'll never hear this on the news channels. You'll never hear this talked about in popular culture. The pharmaceutical industry saved the world, number one. The US was 90% of that. Even the German vaccine, which Pfizer acquired, it never would have been able to be tested and distributed at such a rate, manufactured, tested the way it was without a Pfizer behemoth behind it, driven by the profit motive, to not only make people better, but to make money while you were doing it. There was some editorials coming out about one of the vaccines, I think the Oxford vaccine, which was developed not for profit, as if somehow this is the way we want to go. And I think it would be a crime, frankly, against humanity, to be blunt, because the amount of death, debilitation we would have if we didn't have the kind of energetic, competitive, profit-driven motive to develop so many great, not only vaccines, but drugs to treat this. And there is a reason the United States led all of this, and that's because we are the main driver for all of pharmaceutical innovation right now. Even China, which is frankly going to surpass Europe soon, is mostly a Me Too. They're innovative products, but they're second, third, fourth generation types of products. They're nice copies, if you will, or at least different copies. And it's not to be pejorative to them, it's to state facts. So as long as we all want and demand to have great science translated into great medicine, which is exactly what happened here in an unprecedented way. I mean, it is shocking to think of how good these vaccines are, and they are astonishing. And one of the little known facts I'll just add to that is that, or a little talked about facts is, yes, they're only 92% effective, which is, by the way, about twice as effective as the best flu vaccine, but they're almost 100% effective at preventing death. And this is the only thing that matters when it comes to a virus, death and hospitalization. Because we have a flu vaccine, which many people get, and it's about 40 to 50% effective in a good year. And it's not much better at preventing death and hospitalization, but these vaccines are 98 to 100% effective at preventing death and hospitalization. And it's really a testament to human ingenuity and creativity, as well as all the removal of bureaucratic roadblocks to get these out there.
Yeah, those developments have definitely been a huge bright spot for us, in this pandemic. To continue on sort of dark topics, though, I think there's a perception in the U.S. that the pharmaceutical industry is really corrupt and that there's a lot of bribery that goes on between big pharmaceutical executives and the FDA. Is there any basis to that, or is it just a few bad cases that got blown up in the public's mind?
Yeah, I think this is overblown, way overblown. first of all, FDA administrations change. And if there were bad drugs on the market and the next administration, certainly when the politics change, you know the next administration would love nothing more than to take out the drugs approved by the previous administration that were unsafe and ineffective, and because the FDA was bribed because of the bad prior administration. We all know that. So the system has an odd check built into it. The second thing is there are very few doctors, very few, out of the tens of thousands of physicians that practice in the US that would ever be influenced substantially by a bad drug. Yes, pharma companies promote off-label sometimes and they get slapped and they get fines. But for the most part, those drugs work because doctors want their patients to feel better. And if the drugs didn't work, their patients wouldn't feel better. And then the patients would go to a different doctor. It really works, the system, especially when you have choice in doctors and choices about your healthcare in general. So I think the news loves to make us the bad guys. It's ironic because unless you're killed in an accident, and I mean killed in an accident, if you're only maimed or if you're harmed in an accident, you, along with everybody else on the planet, is going to need one or more pharmaceutical agents or devices or both before they die. And it's astonishing how people like to poo-poo the people who, when one of your relatives gets in trouble, you are hoping that there's something available. And when there's not, I can tell you, I had plenty of patients who used to tell me, why isn't anyone working on this? Why aren't there more options for me? When my cancer progresses, what am I going to do? What's the next option that I have? And all of this leads to building an industry which should continue to provide patients with every option. One of the companies I work with has a wonderful saying: we look forward to a day when no patient ever runs out of options. And that means to continue to innovate and do all the things that I talked about.
Cool. So on that sort of positive note that you've set up there, either within your companies or in the sort of broader industry, are there any innovations on the horizon right now, specific things that you're really excited about that you'd like to share with us?
Well, I think there are some fields that are just sort of getting off the ground. The two big ones are regenerative medicine and gene editing. The notion that we can go in with typically a virus, ironically, it's a virus, that carries a gene editor, if you will, and it just goes in there and looks at your genome. And if, for instance, you have if you have sickle cell anemia, then you need to replace one or preferably both of those copies of the bad sickle cell gene with a normal gene. And the idea that we could actually do that now is the stuff of science fiction 15, 20 years ago. I mean, that's how quickly this is emerging. And it's not that far away. So we can fix those kinds of things to the point where someone doesn't have sickle cell anemia. They may still, some of the cells in their body will no doubt carry the sickle cell gene. And unfortunately, we don't have a way yet to make sure they don't transmit it to their offspring. But we certainly have a way to go in and change enough of their sickle precursor cells into a normal cell so that they make blood normally and never suffer from sickle cell anemia and all of the dire consequences of that. So gene editing is coming along and it's moving very quickly. And we're going to run into some troubles. There's no question. This is man plans, nature laughs, and nature's had 4 billion years to mess around. And we're trying to do this all in the last 5-6 years. So we got stuff to learn for sure, but we have to keep trying and we have to be curious because there are enough patients suffering from these diseases that we've got to fix them. There are a whole bunch of less common genetic diseases that are being addressed now that never would have been addressed 10, 15 years ago because there was no profit in it and there was no way to actually do it to a way that was meaningful, meaning we can stop the progression of blindness in you. And if you come and get this gene therapy, we can probably guarantee you'll have sight for years or maybe even a decade or 2 or 3 instead of going blind within a couple of years. There are uncommon diseases that do that and where we are intervening. I could wax and wane on that for a long time, but that's one of the exciting things. The other one that comes to mind is regenerative medicine, which is, and it's sort of exemplified, pardon me, football in the rest of the world. Soccer in the United States is on everybody's mind with with the excitement of the Italy over the UK. But cartilage is not going to be present in most of these soccer players' knees when they're 50 or 60. It's just not. And we have got to learn how to replace that cartilage. And it's not sufficient to continue to give people total knee replacements and so on. So regenerating the cartilage in the knee is terrific. But going from there, and even more exciting, is the idea that we might be able to take people, and we will, we just need to figure it out. How do we take people with spinal cord injuries and get their spines to regenerate to the point where they can actually start to get back to a normal life? You know, this is pie in the sky stuff. But remember, 10 years ago, the notion of changing somebody's genome was pie in the sky stuff then. And we're making headway. We're beginning to understand how reproduction works, how things like planaria and other organisms actually regenerate stuff. Tadpoles and things can regenerate certain limbs and so on. So we will learn how to do this, and we'll learn how to make collagen and so on in the culture and in people's knees and where we need to make it. Obviously, the last thing, and this is somewhat controversial, is Alzheimer's. Why haven't we made progress on arguably the most devastating disease now? It is growing to be, and it will become the #1 killer or indirect killer of people going forward. And we're trying. And there's a lot of controversy over the Biogen drug. I don't think it's the place to get into it. But it's clear that drug, even if it does work, is not a real answer. I mean, it may be on the path to a real answer, but we need more innovation in Alzheimer's, and frankly, in many other neurodegenerative disease. But Alzheimer's is the poster child because it's prevalent and it's devastating. And it is one of the last areas of medicine where we really have not made any substantial progress yet. So this is one that I think we're trying. And there are a lot of companies around that are trying crazy ideas. And eventually some of those crazy ideas will turn out to be less crazy. And one of them will work, and then everybody will say, oh, of course. And then when one works, it's easier to build on the shoulders of giants. Then there'll be a second one and a third one, and we'll eventually start to understand why your neurons decide to give out later in life, typically, and what to do about it and how to stave that off.
Well, that all sounds amazing. Thank you for sharing all of that with us. I think we got at some really important points about innovation in this field that is so important to human flourishing today. So I really, really appreciate that. And I really appreciate all the work that you're doing towards it. Any final comments from either of you?
I would say that it's wonderful to be part of and participate in the Ayn Rand organizations, the variety of them, including Altas. I'm thrilled that the Objective Standards reached out on this topic. It's obviously dear to my heart. And I do think people should smile and be proud of being human, because our progress in medicine and making people's lives better is just astonishing. And it's something we can all look to and use to provide sort of beacons in light when there's an awful lot of news that's not very positive. But frankly, we are making great progress, and we will continue to do so.
And that was part of our reason for starting this podcast, is we wanted to highlight some of the really great achievements that are going on all the time. So.
Absolutely. And there are, and unfortunately, those don't seem to make as good news. I personally would only watch good news. So I don't have to watch a lot of news because there isn't much of it, but this is certainly part of it. Thank you.